All right, so you clicked on this deep dive.
Yeah.
And you're probably thinking, friendship crisis. Me? Nah, I've got my crew. Yeah, well, hold on to your beer helmets for a minute because we're going to drop some knowledge today that just might change the game.
Yeah, what we're looking at today is this growing body of research that's starting to suggest that things might not be as solid as they seem on the surface when it comes to guys and their friendships.
Crisis sounds intense, but we've got some pretty interesting data backing it up from the Survey Center on American Life. There's this report from Ecomundo and even a blog post from Cheerful Egg. And the findings are pretty eye-opening, but basically it looks like guys are feeling a lot more isolated these days.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant shift in the landscape of male friendships over the past few decades. And the implications go way beyond just feeling a little lonely. We're talking about real consequences for men's mental and physical well-being.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. What exactly are these researchers seeing? I mean, back in the day, your dad probably had a whole squad of buddies he hung out with every weekend. What's changed?
Well, for starters, the numbers tell a pretty stark story. Back in 1990, more than half of men reported having at least 6 close friends. Today, that number has been cut in half.
Wow, that's a pretty drastic drop.
No.
So are we all just getting busier or what?
Well, it's definitely more nuanced than just that. While societal shifts definitely play a role, I think, later marriages, guys moving more frequently for work, just the overall hustle of modern life. There are deeper factors at play here. One of the biggest is something researchers call the man box.
Man box. What is that, like some kind of emotional prison for dudes?
It's not quite that dramatic, but it's definitely a limiting factor. The man box refers to these rigid societal expectations of what it means to be a man. Tough, stoic, self-reliant, the whole strong, silent type ideal.
Yeah, I get it. It's like you're supposed to just suck it up and deal with stuff on your own. No complaining, no crying, no showing weakness.
Exactly. And while those traits might have served a purpose in certain contexts in the past, they can really hinder genuine connection and emotional intimacy in modern friendships.
So basically, we're all walking around in these invisible boxes,
Mm-hmm.
afraid to let anyone see what's really going on inside.
In a way, yes. And the consequences can be pretty serious. That same Survey Center report found that a staggering 15% of men today report having NO close friends at all. That's a 5-fold increase since 1990.
Whoa, that's heavy. So we've got fewer close friends overall and a growing number of guys with 0 close friends.
Yeah.
Not exactly a recipe for a thriving social life.
And that's where the alarm bells really start ringing. Because loneliness isn't just a feeling, it's a public health crisis with serious implications for men's mental and physical well-being.
All right, so we've established that there's a problem, but before we spiral into a full-blown existential crisis, let's break down why this man box thing is so detrimental to guys' friendships.
Well, think about it. If you're constantly trying to project this image of strength and invulnerability, it's pretty tough to open up and be truly authentic with your friends. You're always guarding yourself, afraid to show any vulnerability.
Yeah, it's like you're wearing a mask all the time, and if everyone's wearing a mask, how can you really connect on a deeper level?
Exactly. And that lack of genuine connection can be incredibly isolating. It's like you're surrounded by people, but still feel completely alone. And it's not just about, feeling lonely. This isolation can have some pretty serious consequences for men's health. We're talking, increased risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, even heart disease.
Wow, so it's not just about having someone to grab a beer with after work. This is about our overall well-being.
Absolutely. Friendships provide a buffer against stress, a sense of belonging, and an outlet for emotional support. When those things are missing, it takes a toll.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty bleak picture here. But what can we actually do about it? How do we break out of this man box and start building the kinds of friendships that actually make us healthier and happier?
That's where the Cheerful Egg blog comes in. The author Lionel has some really insightful advice on how to level up your friendships, specifically for guys.
All right, Coach Lionel, give us the playbook. What's the first move?
Well, Lionel points out that a lot of guys struggle with simply staying in touch between work, family commitments, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life. Making time for friends often falls by the wayside.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. It's like, we should hang out soon. But then weeks turn into months.
Yeah.
And suddenly you realize you haven't seen your buddy in ages.
Exactly. So Lionel's first piece of advice is to be intentional about making time for your friends. Schedule those guys' nights, even if it's just once a month. Put it on the calendar and treat it like an important meeting.
Okay, I can get behind that. It's like you wouldn't just forget to go to work or skip your kid's soccer game, right?
Okay.
So why treat your friendships any differently?
Right. They deserve that same level of commitment. And another tip Lionel offers is to find an activity you can do together regularly. Something you both enjoy, whether it's hitting the gym, joining a sports league, volunteering, whatever. Having that shared experience can really strengthen the bond.
That makes sense. It's easier to connect when you're doing something together rather than just sitting around trying to force a conversation.
Exactly. And speaking of conversations, that's another area where Lionel encourages guys to step up their game. He argues that too many male friendships get stuck at the surface level, talking about sports, work, current events, without ever really delving into the stuff that matters.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It's like you joke around, bust each other's chops, but rarely get into the real stuff, the things that are actually going on in your lives.
Right. And that's where the real connection is missed. The shared vulnerabilities, the support system, the feeling like someone genuinely has your back.
So how do we get there? How do we go from talking about the game to talking about our dreams, our fears, our hopes for the future? It feels kind of awkward, like where do you even start?
It definitely takes some practice, but it's not as daunting as it might seem. Lionel suggests starting small. Instead of diving right into your deepest, darkest secrets, try asking your friend about their goals for the year, what they're struggling with at work, or what they're most excited about in their lives right now. Show genuine interest in their lives beyond the superficial stuff.
Okay, that feels more approachable. It's like you're not forcing them to bare their soul on the first date. You're just showing that you're curious and that you care.
Exactly. And remember, reciprocity is key. If you want them to feel comfortable opening up to you, you've got to be willing to share a bit of yourself too.
So it's like a two-way street. You build trust by being vulnerable with each other.
Precisely. And as that trust deepens, the conversations will naturally flow into more meaningful territory.
Lionel actually tells a funny story about his own awkward attempts at initiating deep conversations with his friends. Like he once asked a buddy about the most personal thing he'd ever written in his journal.
Yeah, maybe not the best icebreaker, but the point is, you got to be willing to put yourself out there and step outside that comfort zone. And hey, a little humor can go a long way in diffusing those awkward moments.
Totally. It's like you don't have to turn into some kind of touchy-feely therapy session.
Yeah.
Just be open, be genuine, and don't be afraid to laugh at yourself along the way.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between being vulnerable and keeping things lighthearted. Because let's face it, no one wants to hang out with a Debbie Downer all the time.
So we're not saying you have to turn into a completely different person. Just be a little more intentional about how you connect with your friends.
Right. And another thing Lionel talks about is challenging those outdated notions of masculinity that hold us back from forming deeper connections. He's particularly critical of the whole bromance thing.
Yeah, it's weird how we even have a term for two guys being close friends. It's like, why can't two dudes just be close without everyone assuming something's going on?
It's this strange over-sexualization of male friendship that can really limit our ability to connect.
And then there's that whole alpha male competition thing. Lionel talks about overhearing these guys at a restaurant. Basically having a 30-minute humble brag about how crappy their supercars were.
Man, I've seen that too. It's like some guys are just programmed to constantly compete, even when it comes to who's got the most problems.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
And it definitely gets in the way of genuine connection. You can't be truly open with someone when you're constantly trying to one-up them.
Right. And Lionel makes a really insightful point about this. He argues that this constant competition actually stems from a place of insecurity. It's like we're so afraid of appearing weak or vulnerable that we overcompensate by trying to prove we're the strongest, most successful, most whatever in the room.
So it's not really about being alpha. It's about masking our insecurities.
Exactly. And the irony is when we let go of that need to compete, we actually create space for genuine connection and vulnerability.
So the key takeaway here is, if you want deeper friendships, ditch the competition. Embrace the vulnerability and be the bro you wish you had.
Exactly. Be the change you want to see in your brohood.
So we've talked about ditching the man box, being more vulnerable, making time for your bros, all great stuff. But what if some of those friendships have already kind of faded? What about the guys we've lost touch with over the years?
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's one thing to maintain those existing friendships, but rekindling those dormant connections can feel even more daunting.
Yeah, it's like, hey, man, it's been 5 years. Want to grab a beer? It feels kind of weird.
But, here's the thing. The Survey Center on American Life found that while a lot of people lost touch with friends during the pandemic, nearly as many people made new friends during that same time. So it's not impossible to rebuild those connections even after years of drifting apart.
So how we do it? What's the best way to reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in ages? Slide into their DMs. Send a carrier pigeon. Smoke signals.
Maybe skip the carrier pigeon. But the principle is sound. Just reach out. A simple text, a phone call, even a DM can go a long way. You don't need some grand gesture or elaborate apology for falling out of touch. Just acknowledge the gap and express your interest in reconnecting.
So something like, hey man, I've been thinking about you lately. Would be great to catch up sometime.
Exactly. Keep it casual, genuine, and open-ended. You're not asking for a lifetime commitment, just a conversation. And remember, they might be feeling the same way. Hesitant to reach out, but secretly hoping you will.
Okay, that takes some of the pressure off. But what if they don't respond? Or what if they're just not interested in reconnecting? Rejection hurts, man.
It's true. Putting yourself out there always comes with the risk of rejection, but it's also a sign of courage and strength. And remember, it's not always personal. They might be going through something, or maybe your timing is just off.
Right. Doesn't mean I have to like it, though.
Totally get that. But here's the thing. Even if they don't respond, or even if it doesn't lead to a rekindled friendship, the act of reaching out still has value. You've shown that you care, and that's a powerful thing. And who knows, maybe it'll plant a seed that grows later on down the line.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the state of male friendships, the man box, and how to break free from those limiting expectations. But what does this all mean for you, the guy listening to this deep dive?
I think of this as a call to action. What one step can you take today to strengthen a friendship, rekindle a lost connection, or simply be a better bro? Maybe it's scheduling that guy's night, reaching out to that friend you've been missing, or just being more present and engaged when you're hanging out with your crew.
Remember, building a solid bro force takes effort. It's not always easy to be vulnerable, to make time in your busy schedule, to push past those awkward moments and get into the real stuff. But trust me, it's worth it. Your health, your happiness, even your longevity depend on it.
And here's a final thought for you to chew on, something we haven't touched on yet today. If this bro crisis is so widespread, if so many guys are struggling with loneliness and isolation, isn't it time we started talking about it more openly?
Yeah, that's a great point. We talk about mental health more than ever these days. But it feels like male friendships are still kind of a taboo topic. It's time to break the silence. Talk to your friends, check in on each other, and let's create a culture where being a good bro isn't just a saying, it's a way of life.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
And keep it real.